All right, Alexander, let's answer the questions from the live stream we did with Scott Ritter. And let's start things off with Commander Crossfire, who says, meditation brings wisdom. Lack of meditation leaves ignorance. Know well what leads you forward and what holds you back.
Perfect. Love it.
That.
Yes.
Mark Hewitt says, so Newland is going to visit Modi. Await the outcome with interest.
Mm-hmm. So do I. I can't imagine that will go well, but anyway, off she goes.
Claudia, thank you for that super sticker. Red Viking says, what happened to the promised Azov fighter trial? That's a good question.
No, that's a very, very good question. At the moment, I have heard nothing about it. I suspect that all that's been put into a drawer until the war ends.
Ricey says, Van de Crazy draft law threatens property owners.
Yes, is the short answer. The sanctity of private property, one of the foundation stones of the Western economic system, of modern capitalism, is being destroyed before our eyes in the most casual way. And it's scary to see it happen, but happening it is.
Chris says, we need a new treaty, Novi Dogovad.
Yeah, we do need a new treaty, but how are we going to negotiate it when trust is gone? I mean, trust is indispensable in negotiations. And without trust, and there isn't much around at the moment, it's not going to happen. And I get to say straight away, not while this administration is in office.
Yevyen, thank you for that super chat. Kalin says, are EU, USA leaders intentionally crashing everything, USD economies, etc., to implement WEF, Fourth Industrial Revolution, or are the two things unrelated?
Well, we're asked this question all the time. I think that one should never look beyond incompetence and, well, fanaticism and craziness and all of those things to explain the decisions that are being made. I do understand this point about, blow up everything to create the great new world that the WF would like us to live in. I would say that, we did a program about the WEF recently, its latest meeting in Davos. We said that they all look like very diminished figures. If this really is nonetheless a plan to blow up everything, destroy everything, so that you can build this great new world anew, then these people are even crazier than they look, because if you sow chaos, you will be engulfed by chaos. That's all I can say about this. I mean, it's not going to work for them. It's going to be very bad for all of us, but it's not going to work for them.
A different perspective says, why is the U.S. military called mighty? Yes, we can drop bombs, haymakers, but besides that, we are really unproven. We think we can match up with an equal, defensively built Russia-China. As a vet, I think not.
My own opinion about this is that the most realistic people that I've spoken to in discussion with about these sort of matters are people who have either served in the US military or who are close to the military in some ways. And I think they understand very well precisely the points that you've been making. Read the things that people like Scott Ritter, Douglas McGregor, Daniel Davis, all former officers in the US military, have been saying about the many problems that the US military is suffering from. They are not deluded about this. They understand war. They understand the problems. The US military remains the most powerful military in the world, but it is not invincible. It is not unconquerable, and it is being asked to do far too much. Its resources are stretched thin.
Summer of 1970, thank you for that super sticker. Rufus says, Scott, I never miss one of your podcasts. Ukraine has become so corrupt. Is there any hope for it to become truly free of Western influence?
Not for the time being. I mean, perhaps when the war ends, we might start to see steps towards a different Ukraine. But to be honest, I'm not sure that there'll be any Ukraine left when the war ends. So I'm very pessimistic, and I say this straightforwardly, about the future of this country.
Radio Constantinopolis says, we all know Eurasia's goal is the managed deconstruction of the neoliberal West. That would take the expansion of the conflict. Where do you think this will happen first, and when will the conditions be ripe?
I think the short answer is this. I think the Eurasians, the Russians, are deconstructing neoliberalism in the West with the assistance of the West. It's the West that is prolonging this war. It's the West that's sending arms. It's the West that's making impossible demands. It's the West that says that it's going to help Ukraine for as long as it takes, whatever that means. If we want to stop that process, then in the West, then what we need to do is to start negotiating, and start negotiating now. No sign of that happening. And in the meantime, the Russians are, as you correctly say, slowly, steadily, incrementally deconstructing us, and we have no one to blame but ourselves. So I mean, that's all I can say about this.
Sparky says Stuttgart Stallions still rule over the Kaiserslautern Raiders. Scott answered that, actually. Yeah. Join OSRS says, Scott, do you think this war would have started with Hillary had she won in 2016? During her campaign, she asked if she would risk war with Russia over Syria. She said yes, and that's how DT got my vote.
I think it would have done. I can't answer for Scott, but I will say this. I think it would have done. I think if Hillary had been elected, we would have had a war in Ukraine much sooner than the one we now have, and we would have seen a major escalation in Syria. We owe it to the American people who elected Donald Trump to the presidency that all of this horror was postponed for more than 4 years, because the Biden administration is simply carrying out in its own bungled way the agenda that Hillary would have followed. That's my view.
From 31st Century Socialism, thank you, arms inspectors, American, Russian, and UN. Yeah. Marcus says, angry Mr. Ritter is the best Mr. Ritter.
Yes, I agree.
Far, thank you for that. Far, thank you for that super chat. Sparky says, Abel Archer 83 and Pershing's 2. What could go wrong?
Well, indeed, yeah. I mean, these are events from the late Cold War I remember very well, and you're quite right. I mean, what could go wrong? It's nuclear escalation out of control.
Let's see, where am I? T-Tom says, Northern Fleet warships led by the frigate Admiral Gorshkov rescues a French citizen from a yacht in distress in the Atlantic Ocean. In opposite situation, will French Westerners do the same?
No, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they would do. I'm not. I mean, bear in mind, this is the decision of the captain and the crew. No doubt they got some, green light to do it from Moscow. I don't know. I would hope so. I would hope that if a Russian ship was in distress, a Western naval warship would come to the rescue. I think the crew would want to do that. Whether the political leaders would let them is another matter.
Okay. Tyler Durden says, maybe the Russian mobilization is not only for Ukraine, but for Europe. Shivers.
Yes. Some people are asking that question too, and shivers indeed. And listen to what Scott said about the state of our militaries in Europe.
Okay. Yov, thank you for that super chat. Psionic, thank you for that super sticker. Rockabilly, thank you for that super chat. Winston Fahrenheit, thank you for that super sticker. Sparky says, sure, Abel Archer 83 was just a signal corps exercise, but we were the unit who did radar data telemetry for Pershing's 2.
Yeah. And the Russians picked up on it and jumped to all sorts of dangerous conclusions, and disaster nearly happened. Scott knows all about that. He could talk about that at length. But we got out of it because the leaders at that time realized the danger and looked for solutions. I don't see the same understanding from today's leaders.
Denise Cervantes, thank you for that awesome super sticker. Elsbeta Schwab, thank you for that super chat. Custard Pie says, many thanks for your work from Romania. Thank you for that. Sea in the Sky, thank you for that super sticker. Edward Bernays says, is it possible that the donated tanks being sent to Ukraine will be used in a bid to garrison Odessa in order to ensure or claim Ukrainian access to the sea following any eventual peace deal?
It's very possible, and it's been much discussed. We don't know what they'll do. My own view, actually, is that the Ukrainians will probably use them in penny packets. They'll throw them into various attacks and offensives like they did with all the other equipment they've been given, and they'll be burnt up in that way. But, it's possible that that's the plan.
A different perspective says, I just can't see how we could win. China is defensive, so their planes have places to land. Wouldn't they just use hypersonic missiles to take out the naval fleet and airfields? Where would they land?
Scott answered that question. I think he said yes. He agreed with you.
Yeah. Peter Duner, thank you for that super sticker. Elza says, maybe the West shouldn't brag about lying to Putin. They haven't done a good job preparing for the war against Russia. Stoltenberg and Schultz are bragging for weapons all around the world.
We shouldn't brag about lying at all. It's a very bad idea, certainly not in diplomacy. One of the first guidebooks on diplomacy, manuals on diplomacy written in the 18th century said diplomats shouldn't lie. All it does is leave a poison behind it. And I think that's still true, by the way. So yes, and I think all your other points I fully agree with too.
T-Tom says, Scott, I saw Croatian presidents on the Mirotvorets list. As a Serb, I'm jealous. Can you put a good word to put Serbian president on the list? Pretty please.
I don't want anybody on that list. I think the whole list is a disgrace, actually. No, it's worse than a disgrace. It's a threat.
Stephen Walter, thank you for that super sticker. Gerrit Bakken, thank you for that super chat. Jetset.1 says, Scott, how many T-14 Armada has Russia produced to date? I think Scott answered that. Yeah. Matt X says, you all spoke about the importance of Lukashenko being in Belarus, but what about the significance of the weak leaders like Schultz, Bojo, Macron, etc.? Did the U.S. have a hand in controlling the political landscape in Europe?
It clearly does have a hand. I'm not going to speculate about how it's done, but clearly it does have a hand. And I cannot believe it's a coincidence that all the leaders who once upon a time stood up and, spoke out and sought good relations with Russia. Jacques Chirac, of course, is dead, but Schroeder is discredited. Berlusconi's been investigated. They were all shuttled out of power. We've seen what's just happened in the Czech Republic. We saw what happened in Austria before. I don't think these things happen by chance.
Red Viking says, give the dog a bone. Thank you for that. Ricardo Alfonso says, regarding the F-16, no one talks about how they would be refueled. They're going to fly from Poland to East Ukraine, fully loaded on a single tank. Aerial tankers can easily be taken out.
You're absolutely right about this, except in one respect. I've seen lots of people ask the question about how are these things going to be refueled. This business of the F-16s looks like a complete nightmare. It's not happening. I've come to that conclusion. Or if it is happening, it's going to be a crazy idea that it's going to result in a disaster, an aerial disaster.
From Jetset.1, Scott, Sukhoi Su-57 had just had its maiden flight. Will we see it in action in Ukraine? And how many Russians have it?
Scott answered that question. It is in fact not had its maiden flight recently. It is in service, and we know that several of them are operating in Ukraine. We don't know the exact number. The Russians are keeping that secret.
Adil Farad, thank you for that super sticker. Marcus Aurelius, thank you for that super chat. CGJP55, thank you for that super sticker. Mobius Zero says, why do people underestimate Russia and China, especially China, so damn much?
Arrogance, vanity, conceit, the fact that we in the West have been so powerful for so long, we can't quite bring ourselves to imagine that other countries that are not part of the collective West are our peers. You know, I think you have to look at the recent past. And
NGS says, is Russia advancing? NGS says, is Russia advancing slowly and gradually on purpose to stretch out and exhaust Ukrainian logistics and supply lines? Is this part of the Russian strategy?
Well, I don't know what the Russian strategy is because, you know, the Russians don't discuss these things with me. But I have been reading increasing numbers of articles about how the Ukrainian army is becoming exhausted. There was a very interesting article in The Guardian questioning whether Ukrainian morale would withstand another year of the war. And there's been a letter from a British MP, Ian Duncan Smith, former leader of the Conservative Party, to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, saying that more and more Ukrainian soldiers are committing suicide.
From Tim Powers, 1225, great info. Thank you for that, Tim. 182 AOR says, for Scott, the call to duty, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Your nation needs millions of veterans to answer the call, serve one more time, and to march on Washington, D.C. The Martin Luther King way, stop NATO and colonial wars, join the call to action for the nation and for world peace.
Well, Scott answered that.
Actually. We talked about that, yeah. Torbjorn says, good seeing Scott on the Duran. Torontonian 1 says, Alexander, you are on fire today. And thank you, Torontorian 1 for that super chat. And San Randis says, great work, gentlemen. Chungle says, hello from Cape Town. And Budweiser, thank you for that super sticker. And Rice says, the MSM, don't mention Russia's devastating Tornado S.
No, they don't. Which is, of course, the Russian equivalent of the HIMARS. Apparently very, very similar in concept, but with a longer range.
456T123G says, does it matter how long this war lasts? The superclass will simply start another. The Prophet's wife.
You know, you're probably right about the second. I mean, you can already see all kinds of, war drums beating in the Middle East with Iran, China, of course, the South China Sea. But nonetheless, we have to get through this particular war because it is a very dangerous one. And it's important how it ends because, of course, if it doesn't end in a satisfactory way, then we will simply encourage the people who provoke this war to take even bigger risks.
Dino Legovich says, I remember Scott Ritter from 2001.
So do I. I'm very proud to be able to speak with him now and to call him a friend, by the way. I would never have imagined that in 2001.
Warwagon 1985 says, the problem is that our Western leaders suffer from intellectual incest. They've all come from the same university, the School of Globalism, different campuses, the same curriculum. Their cognitive gene pool has collapsed.
Yes,
Well said.
I agree with that completely.
Cam Nana says, thank you. Thank you for that. And Zios says, great show. Thank you. Thank you for that as well. Yura Gabor says, in case of the fragmentation of Ukraine, can the Hungarian army in its current state take, secure and hold mountainous Transcarpathia, just smaller than Connecticut, or would it be suicidal?
I think they could do it, provided obviously they had support from the local people, which I suspect they probably would. But I agree, it would be a complex operation. The Hungarian army isn't particularly big, from what I know about it. And, it would be a tough call, but I think they could do it.
From Borg Khan says, hi, gentlemen, great discussion. Sad to see the Eurasian war heating up. Let us hope for the best. Keep up the great work. Resistance is not futile. Commando Crossfire says, is it possible for NATO to create strongholds in Western Ukraine that will stalemate the conflict and allow Ukraine to rearm and reorganize?
I don't think so. Again, I'm not a military. I'm not a military thing, but I think if the whole of Ukraine collapses, and I think the idea of setting up strongholds, very much what, a certain Austrian person with a moustache was trying to do, or was talking about doing in the last stages of the war. I don't think it's realistic. I think they'd be besieged. I think they'd be broken. I just don't think that is a viable concept at all. There may be some people thinking about it, but I don't think it would work.
Joe Public, thank you for that super chat. Ruth Beck, thank you for that super sticker. T says, love your shows. I watch every one. Need Scott more often. Have a great day. Slava Crimea. Thank you for that, T. Angry Warhawk says, hey, Scott, I forgot to ask you this in our Q&A yesterday. Where does the idea that Russia has low-quality military equipment and are generally incompetent come from? P.S. Please give my channel a mention.
Yes,
Scott
well, he did. We asked answered that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mobius Zero says, in the event of war against China, how in the hell will Japan get squashed like a bug by China? Japan is outmanned, outgunned, and outmatched in every way by China.
Well, it does have, Japan is a big country. It's got a big industrial base. It's got a significant military. So let's not, overstate things. But the Chinese have made a point about Japan, which is that as a percentage of China's GDP, it's now roughly the same point that Taiwan was in the year 2000. So that gives you some idea of how fast China has grown. And in military terms, I agree, China is starting to surpass Japan in almost every conceivable metric. I hope the Japanese understand that and understand that the best policy is to come to some kind of rapprochement with China. There was a period of time in the 80s and 90s when Chinese-Japanese relations, never good, never exactly easy, but they found ways to get on. And I think that's what they should try to learn to do again.
Archie What's It says, never feed a dog when it's barking. It will think it's doing the right thing, and so keep barking for treats.
True enough. As an owner of two dogs, I can say that.
Rufus says, when Russia secures the DPR and other territories, the conflict will not end. NATO will arm Ukraine endlessly, it seems. Regime change is the only hope.
Well, look what the West is saying. They say that they will support Ukraine as long as it takes. And Ukraine says it will continue the war until every millimeter of what it says is territory is reoccupied. If you think about that, if the Russians march clear the entire DPR, the LPR, the Kherson region, all the rest, the war will still continue if the Ukrainians and the West go on doing what they say they're going to do. I don't think it's practical, but, ultimately, you're right. The only way this war can end is for Ukraine to be defeated. I hate to say that, but given the stance both Ukraine and the West are taking, I can't see any other way.
Lema Lizovska says, what if Ukraine lost weapons regarding in Taiwan? A new war?
Well, indeed, quite. Absolutely. If we start shuffling weapons into Taiwan, provoke the Chinese by pretending that we don't recognize Taiwan's independence and then treating it as independent, then we could very well end up in a war with China over Taiwan. And that would be a disaster, bigger disaster than the war in Ukraine.
Gus says, the Duran and Scott Ritter, I couldn't miss the stream. Thank you for your excellent work, gentlemen. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Alex Glantz, thank you for that super sticker. Dennis Manibusan, thank you for that super sticker. Matless X says, what are the odds of the past week being a red pill moment for Olaf Scholz? Will the U.S. humiliating him with these tanks result in him de-escalating?
Well, you see, I think the problem with Olaf Scholz is that, yes, I think he might have had a red pill moment. He's said to be absolutely livid about the whole business about the tanks. He feels that he was cheated by the US and bullied by the other European leaders, who are also, by the way, not coming forward with the Leopard 2s that they told Scholz that they would provide. So I think he feels very, very angry about it. But he is weak. He always ends up doing things which he knows are wrong. Now, I have to say, you can deal with people who are clever and strong and then wrong, but then come to realize that they've been wrong. But you can never deal with weakness. Weakness, just continues. In fact, it gets bigger.
T says Ukraine announced full mobilization age 20 to 55.
They've now brought it down in the sense that they're now registering people from the age of 16, which is pretty grim. I mean, they're sacrificing the lives of their men for this war.
Layla 884 says Scott dogs and cats, Alexander dogs. Alex ? The lone gunman says people should look at the ruble collapse, LTCM, and the financial warfare the U.S. played in 97-98 against Russia, leading to hedge fund bailout for a ruble bet that went bad with Boris Yeltsin's wake up.
Well, it did, and it, of course, led eventually to Vladimir Putin. So if it was the US that arranged it, it didn't, in the end, turn out very well for them. So always be careful what you do. Always be careful what you wish for. The ruble isn't collapsing.
Mobius Zero says, why don't the neocons use India against China instead of Japan? India actually has a decent chance against China in a war, unlike Japan.
Because India isn't prepared to play that game. I mean, it looked for a time as if it might be, but Modi has thought about it. He's had more dealings with the US, and he has come to realize that the US is using him and India, and he doesn't want to be used.
Wei Wang, thank you for that super chat. T-Tom says, what is the estimate? Poland's percentage, Baltic states' percentage, Romania's percentage to go in directly in a period of the end of March and beginning of May 2023, from where it will come first? And what about Finland?
I think the prospects of Poland doing something are high. I think the Baltic states more difficult because, well, they'd have to cross Belarus, and I think that would be unbelievably dangerous, and I don't think they actually do it. But I think the prospects of Poland doing that are high. I'm not saying it's a certainty.
A says, anything less than a total Russian victory from Kiev down to Kherson along the Dnieper will certainly prolong the conflict to the point of no return.
I agree. I said that before.
Abkadeus says, will China make a move on Taiwan before the Western nations have time to rebuild their militaries?
The trend is for us to end up in some kind of a war over Taiwan. I hate to say that, but that is the truth. And if you're looking at this from the perspective of a Chinese planner, I can see why they may be saying to Xi Jinping, the sooner we do this, the better from our point of view. Let's do it whilst our military position is strong and getting stronger before the United States starts to do things that might close our time window. So I think we are possibly heading towards such a confrontation, and I don't think we should ignore that possibility.
Sparky says, Scott pairs up with the brilliant Garlic Nixon every Wednesday on Rockfin and YouTube.
He certainly does.
Thank you, Sparky. Alex Shirazi says, first, love God. Second, love wife, family. Third, love the Duran and Scott Ritter's analysis.
Well, we're in rather resplendent company. That's all I can say.
The spy guy says, Surovikin is now acting like Monty in the desert, cautious and with purpose, when he defeated Rommel.
Yes.
Bernard, thank you for that super chat. Gail, thank you for that super chat. Jamila says, thank you guys. Thank you guys. Do really good job. Please condemn Ethiopia's government to punish Orthodox Christmas.
I didn't know that they were doing that. I have to say, I'm astonished. If they are doing it, then I'm horrified. But, you know, I need to see some links before I said that categorically.
PJM75 says, wish the very best to Alexander, Alex, and Scott, as well as all my Putin bots in the chat. Love you. Thank you for that. Bernhard says, Scott, happy you got rid of your cough. I was worried. Thank you for that, Bernard. Gail says, is the BRICS the new NATO for Russia? What will that look like for World War III?
We discussed that extensively in the program.
We discussed that, yeah. Michael says, thank you to Duran and thank you to Scott for sharing your knowledge and experience. Thank you, Michael, for that. Summer of 1970 says, if you're a criminal, your record of crime is called a jacket. Well, the U.S. government not only has a jacket, it has a parka. Thank you for that. Saita, thank you for that super sticker. Elvis, thank you for that super chat. Julia, thank you for that super sticker. Tim Gibson, thank you for that super sticker. Ricardo says, the bragging about deceiving Putin is to poison the well regarding future negotiations.
Yes. Yes. I hope we do find a way back to future negotiations, but up to this moment, you're absolutely right.
Through the eyes of, thank you for that super chat. Lubomir says, thank you guys for the fine reports and some predictions and humor. God bless. Thank you. B456XZ says, in regards to the relegations from Merkel and Hollande, wouldn't it make sense if Russia seeks a UN resolution that the term of the unprovoked attack is no longer valid?
What I think you're trying to do is you're trying to insert a new concept into international law. And there might be some value and merit in what you're saying. The difficulty is that it would have to be agreed, I think, by the UN General Assembly. And I wouldn't have thought that the UN General Assembly would want to do that at the moment, to be frank. Bear in mind that on these sort of issues, the Western powers would have great influence and sway, and I don't think there'd be a majority at the moment.
Rufus says, NATO politicians approve billions for Ukraine, but can't spare a penny for their own people. Ukraine was a slush fund for the elites, nothing more.
Yes, I think that's a very good way of describing it.
Jetset.1 says, Scott, the Russians just released the names behind the Ukrainian biolabs. Will there be consequences for them on the world stage?
I think we discussed this, didn't we, in the program?
We discussed that, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. JMT, thank you for that super sticker. Frank O'Reilly, thank you for that super chat. Natalia, thank you for that super sticker. T says, make no mistake, Putin is the biggest oligarch.
No, I don't agree. I know this is a common view in the West. I simply don't agree with this. I don't think there are oligarchs anymore in Russia. There are businessmen, some are people who are very, very rich indeed. But I don't think power follows wealth in the way that it does in oligarchies. And I don't think in Putin's case it does at all. I don't think he's a millionaire or a billionaire or anything like that. I think he's the president of Russia. He obviously enjoys the lifestyle that goes with that. He works incredibly hard, and I don't think he's an oligarch.
Tatiana, thank you for that super sticker. Operation Zena, thank you for that super sticker. Katya, thank you for that super sticker. T-Tom says, historical fact, 11 out of 37 Russian generals in the Napoleonic War were Serbs.
Oh, I didn't know that. I had no idea about that. Thank you.
Commander Crossfire says, are you surprised that the Russian ultra-rich haven't turned on the government and actually either way stay quiet or voice support for the government?
Well, many of them are doing it. This is the thing to say. I mean, one mustn't make the assumption that simply because you're rich in Russia, you're a liberal and you support relations with the West. I mean, that might have been true in the 90s when, as I said, the nature of wealth in Russia was corrupt, created in all kinds of illicit ways, and the people who ran things, who you could legitimately call oligarchs in those days, were basically a predatory bunch who had little patriotic feeling for the country. But I think today a lot of people who've made their money in Russia, who are pretty rich, are patriots. They're very supportive of their country and of its government in this time of crisis. And, one shouldn't overlook that. And I think that probably most of them feel the same way as most Russians do.
The lone gunman says, damn, Mr. Ritter attracts the sock puppets like bees to honey. Ricardo Alfonso says, one has to wonder about the logic in telling your enemies your plans for them.
Yeah, it's true enough. I've often wondered about that. I mean, Russia never tells us its plans. We're all guessing whether there's going to be offensive and where it's going to come from. Ukraine talks about its plans incessantly. We knew about the Kherson offensive weeks before it happened. Very odd.
Ralph Peterson says, cheers, thanks for your work. J.H. Scott 6, thank you for that super sticker. Joe Public says, what happened to the Scripples?
I wish I knew. I'm very much concerned about the Skripals. I have to say that if they're no longer alive, I would not be surprised. I hope they are. But where they are, what's become of them, we should be asking that question all the time. And the way Britain has behaved about this, taking two people and disappearing them, is frightening. It's outrageous.
Filipina Traveler TV says, Scott, how do you get the time to do all the interviews? We love your work and what you are doing. Stay strong.
He's discussed that.
About that.
Yeah.
Summer of 1970 says, World War II never really ended, did it? Endless war, so sad.
It's in a way that's true. We've never seen a complete resolution of the problems that were left over at the end of the Second World War. And because of that, that's why we're in the mess that we're in now. There was never a peace treaty. By the way, Scott has talked about this. There was never a peace treaty at the end of the Second World War. It was promised. There was supposed to be discussions to create one, but it never happened.
Gail Buffington says, talk about Russians' version of NATO. BRICS, please.
No, it's not. BRICS is not a member of NATO, but Scott talked about this at length. Yeah,
we talked about that. Jacqueline, thank you for that super chat. T-Tom says, what would be the next escalation? Air power, ground forces, satellite destruction, sea fights?
Well, all the talk at the moment is of fighter jets. We'll see whether that comes. I've also seen the suggestion that before we get to fighter jets, it will be long-range drones. Anyway, something is going to come. It always does. They always rule it out, and sooner or later, whatever they've ruled out, they deliver.
Edward Bernays, does the Duran believe the latest military attacks on Iran by Israel is part of the global dimension of the West's war in Ukraine against Russia? As ever, thanks for a great show.
Yes, I mean, I think we do. We do think the two are connected. We did a program about it. It's the target appears to have been a drone factory in Isfahan, which makes some of the drones that are being used by Russia. The latest stories, by the way, is that Russia is going to build a huge drone factory, which is going to be where drones are going to be built under license from Iran, but updated by the Russians, and that the Iranians will share in the ownership and management of this factory, but it will be in Russia.
Cactus Ray, thank you for that super sticker. Ricardo Alfonso says only 447 Challenger 2 tanks, 860 Leclerc were made.
That's true. I mean, this idea that we have vast numbers of tanks is simply wrong. The only country, it seems to me, that in the West that has tanks to spare is the United States, which has large numbers of its tanks in stock. The M1, whatever it is, Abrams in stock. But most of the Leopard 2, a lot of the Leopard 2s that you hear about in Europe, first of all, there are not that many of them to start with, despite what people say, and a lot of them are in poor condition, or they're in, kept in warehouses and cannibalized to keep the others operating, and that's true of the Challenger 2s and of the Leclercs. They're all in limited numbers.
Noah says, hi, Scott and guys. Do you think Russia will have no choice but to move to the Dnieper and maybe Odessa to prevent the Americans from making Ukraine theirs after the war?
I have no doubt that they will move at least as far as the Dnieper. I remain of the view, which I've expressed many times, that I cannot imagine Russia ending this war without Odessa.
Nick Brakovich, thank you for that super sticker. Cactus Ray, thank you for that super sticker. Marilyn Hudson says the Duran, better than any newspaper anywhere. Thank you for that. And Sian Blore says, number 2 NATO, number 2 war rally in London, the 25th of February, 11 a.m. Thanks, guys, for all you do.
Absolutely. But can I just quickly add to that, that there's been attempts to set up anti-war rallies and anti-war meetings in London. And the venues that agree to host these events are now cancelling. And they're coming under enormous pressure to cancel. And it's a matter of real concern.
Diane Morris, thank you for that super sticker. Bruno, thank you for that super sticker. Niles, thank you for that super chat. Tom says, from the start of the SMO is compliant with gaming theory, mathematical discipline. The strengths and objectives were assessed. I don't think Russia was expecting 3 days and welcome there.
I have to say, I agree. I think that we're going to find out a lot more about the original thinking behind it. But I think the first few weeks of the SMO were basically intended to do two things. The first, to force Ukraine into negotiations in the hope that it would agree a peace deal, and that almost happened. And the second, to keep the Ukrainians distracted whilst the Russians improved their positions in Donbass and in southern Ukraine. And they achieved that too. I don't agree with the view that it was all a failure in the first weeks.
Captain Drake, thank you for that super chat. Max R says there is a video of Russian Pantsir system shooting down 12 HIMARS rockets.
Yes. I think that the Russians have become much more successful shooting down HIMARS.
Ricardo Alfonso says maybe the French can train Ukraine on surrendering. Thank you for that, Ricardo Alfonso. Sparty Matt says, I appreciate that Scott has given his honest assessment throughout the conflict. He was one of the few who was correct on Russia winning, and NATO's support weapons would extend or complicate the conflict.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
Sparky says, not sure about the U.S. Army training now. Things can go south fast in military. President Pentagon officials go there on F up, move up principle.
I'm not going to discuss this. Yes, I'm not going to discuss this. I think this is a subject which only people who are in the military know. I mean, Scott said on the program that the US military are still better trained than the European militaries are. And I'm sure that's true. But as I remember, he didn't say that the US military is as trained as well as it should be or was.
John Flanders, thank you for that super chat. Zariel says, Scott, you are a patriot, but more important, you are a human being. With truth, God bless and protect you. Yeah. Thank you, Zariel, for that. And NATO needs to be dissolved. Gerald Armstrong says NATO needs to be dissolved. This will fix a considerable amount of issues.
Yes.
True. Captain Drake, thank you for that super chat. Bella, thank you for that super sticker. Georgie Cooley, thank you for that super sticker. Justin O, thank you for that super sticker. Jay Wayne, thank you for that super chat. Marcelo says, keep up the good work. Mm-hmm. PJM75 says, I just love when Scott starts. It's like rolling thunder, the percussion of sense and information, impressive stuff. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Jay Wayne, thank you for that super chat. Wesley Mank says, So Russians die. Simple. Okay, C Jinto for real. Thank you for that super sticker. Tiagisti says all these three guys for president. Yuri 2K, thank you for that super chat. Pupus, thank you for that super sticker. Le Prouvé Sino Cefade says thank you for your excellence. Scott, did you know Carlo Bustani? I think Scott answered that.
That's a good, yes, I think he did, yeah.
He talked about that, yeah. Winston Fahrenheit said many in Ukraine fervently believe in that ideology that was very popular in Germany, 1930s, 1945. I don't feel sorry for them.
Well, yeah, I understand that feeling. I mean, they are human beings. Never forget that.
Chris M says, why has the West historically hated Russia so much?
That is such an enormous question, and one so difficult to answer in so many different ways that, you know, we've done programs about this. We've discussed this at massive length. Why do they hate it? At the moment, let's be, you know, let's take it as limited as we can. Firstly, it's a powerful country. And secondly, it insists on its own independent course. And the two are intolerable. If you want to set up a globalist empire, then a powerful country that won't do as it's told is going to really, really piss you off. And I think that's the primary explanation at the moment. There are deeper ones, but we could spend hours talking about those.
All right, Robin R., thank you for your super chat. Katie Miggs says, once Scott unleashes an odious, look out below. For that, Marcelo Gonzalez says, they don't understand that with Russia, the higher the pressure, the tougher they get.
Yes.
Kyle, thank you for that super sticker. Peter Sugleris says, brilliant analysis, Scott. As always, why do you think the reaction if the Russia offensive reaches Polish border north to south in Odessa, end of NATO, and then, thanks as always, guys.
Right.
Scott answered that one.
You did answer that, yeah.
Yeah. T-Tom says, do you want to add something?
No, I mean, I didn't want to add. I mean, we discussed it at length in the program.
T-Tom says this war is an extension of World War II, just different names but the same enemies. Just look who was on the German side of World War II, at least till December 1943, and did the U.S. come to fight the Nazis?
Yes, I think there's a lot in this actually, and I come back to what we said earlier in the program. There was no peace treaty, no formal peace agreement ending World War II. And this has been the great problem, sorting out the situation in Europe. By the way, Scott has discussed this before. He's discussed it brilliantly before. And that might be a topic we could talk with him about in a future program.
Kyle, thank you for that super sticker. Commander Crossfire says, I agree with Scott. Russia will stop at the 3-4 regions and offer peace, and only if NATO outrightly rejects continue hostilities will Russia move beyond.
Yes, you see, the point is this. I think you may very well be right, but Ukraine insists it must take back all its territory, and the West says that they will support Ukraine as long as it takes. In other words, they give Ukraine a blank check. So one way or the other, that is a formula for continuing the war, and the Russians will therefore feel obliged to push beyond the 4 regions. They've just said so. I mean, they said if you provide long-range missiles and Ukraine uses them, well, we're going to push them back.
Sparky says Russia needs to take all of Ukraine, least they have Western-sponsored headaches down the road.
Yeah.
Fiona Whelan says, by the way, Ken Rogoff is rooting for cashless society. He claimed that going cashless will benefit the poor. He wrote a book called The Curse of Cash in 2017. This guy has a problem with decency.
He has a very, very interesting personality and ideas, does Mr. Rogoff. That's what I'm going to say.
ISO 982, thank you for that super sticker. Ivo Bikov, thank you for that super sticker. T-Tom says, what if the purpose of this war is only to have a new Cold War?
I don't think that is its only purpose. I think its purpose was a more complicated one. It was all part of the great, grand chessboard. You defeat the Russians in Ukraine, you provoke a crisis there, you install a new government in Moscow, you fragment and weaken the country, you redirect it to China, you go after China, you secure American hegemony forever, you then establish the new global WF-type system. I think this is really what it was all about.
Jay Galt, 1776, says Scott Ritter's new book is amazing. He sells himself short, an exceedingly intellectual man.
He does.
Back to Da Vinci says, is the West, US, NATO exaggerating their lack of weapons to reinvigorate and bring investment focus dedicated to their MIC?
They're not exaggerating their lack of weapons. The lack of weapons is a serious problem for them. It's something that's caught them completely by surprise. More articles about this, by the way, today in the Financial Times. And it's something that's now affecting their weapons deliveries to Ukraine. The latest Pentagon list of deliveries was absolutely meager fare. They're not even saying how many shells or missiles they're going to send because, frankly, the numbers are so low that it would be embarrassing to admit to them.
Joseph says, how do we bring an end to these deep state warmongers in DC? They spread death and chaos across the globe for profit. They will turn the whole world against all Americans from a Cold War veteran. We
need to find a way for the American people to basically drive the money changers out of the temple, the warmongers out of the halls of peace. And they can do it. They have the power.
T-Tom says, Scott, can I buy your book with your signature? Man, you need to sell your book.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm sure you can, but that's something we must ask him.
Peter, 618, thank you for that super sticker. Nabocha, thank you for that super sticker. Ricardo Alfonso says, Sparky is right. Russia should take the country, put in a puppet regime, and stick with the EU paying the debt, Ukraine's debt. That will keep them burdened and less of a threat to Russia. The U.S. will find another war somewhere else.
Yeah, I think so. But I have to say, I think a Ukraine with a puppet regime is a formula for long-term instability. I do hope that something more sustainable than that will eventually be worked out.
Farhan Khan says, if you have listened to him, is Peter Zeihan just entirely wrong about the conflict-Russia trajectory?
I think we talked about that in the program.
Yeah. Peter 618, thank you for that super sticker. Stephen Walter says, truth is treason in a world of lies.
Yeah.
And
telling lies
Germany
and telling the truth in a time of lies is a revolutionary act.
ISO 982 says, would Germany stall sending their tanks following the U.S. tank delivery times?
No, they're going to send Leopard 1s instead of Leopard 2s because the Leopard 2s aren't there available in enough numbers. And Scholz is furious, but he's so weak that he doesn't feel able to do anything else.
Mariana, thank you for that super sticker. Dimitrios, thank you for that super chat. Reality is hard to digest, says the Indians shot down the F-16 with a Soviet Bison. It's been comprehensively proven. It's just going to drag this further and further. Sad times.
Yeah, the Bison is a adaptation by the Russians of the Soviet era MiG-21 fighter jet of the 1950s and 60s, but the Russians developed it with new radar systems for India and air-to-air missiles, and it shot down an F-16. I think that's absolutely correct. So, the F-16 is no more an invincible aircraft than the Leopard 2 is an invincible tank.
Sparky says, boondoggle is a great word when describing many U.S. military-industrial complex projects.
Yes.
Ricardo Alfonso says, wait a minute, so there isn't a secret alien tech from Area 51, no magic fairy weapons from Britain.
True. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but absolutely true.
Orna, thank you for that super chat. Chun Ling, thank you for that super sticker. Ricardo Alfonso says, is the movie version the USA will beat Russia? In the movie version, the USA will beat Russia.
Yeah, in the movie version. But of course, not maybe in the real world.
Math Jamal says, will Turkey eventually be forced to choose between BRICS and the West? The West loves giving states ultimatums.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. That's a huge question. I'm going to say this again. I don't think Erdogan ever wanted to be put in a position where he had to make that choice. But who knows? The way the West has mishandled Turkey has been astonishing, and it goes beyond Erdogan. Can I just say, take this opportunity, since we're talking about Turkey, anybody who's experienced this earthquake, anybody there who's lost their loved ones, who themselves are in difficulties, our thoughts, all of our thoughts, all the members of our community's thoughts are with you.
Wooden TW says, enjoy listening. Thank you for that. Aberration, thank you for that super chat. John Flanders says, I would like to hear Scott's thoughts on Taiwan.
I think he's discussed that, but he's written extensively on this. I mean, he basically thinks we should seek peace, and we certainly a conflict between the United States and China over Taiwan would be a disaster, a calamity, and with the present structure of forces, China would win.
Sparky says, instead of Vietnamization, Ukrainianization.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the parallels are astonishing.
Alex, thank you for that super sticker. Y, thank you for that super sticker. Eric Halverson, thank you for that super sticker. Antonio, thank you for that super chat. LJB, thank you for that super sticker. Mariana, thank you for that super sticker. Johan, thank you for that super chat. Stephen Walter, thank you for that super sticker. Anthony says, how can the U.S. spend $750 billion, their military, than any other country, and yet we have such a weak army?
Well, even the Financial Times is now saying that weapons are so overcomplicated and unfit for proper use. They did a big piece on the M1 Abrams tank discussing its problems. And that's the reason, because tanks, machines, weapons in the United States are made by the MIC, more to make money than to provide the military with the tools it needs for actual war.
Serge says, it's a deal, Scott. I'll buy you a beer when we meet. Stefan says, Alex looks exhausted. VS, thank you for that super sticker. T-Tom says, if all nukes explode just above launch pad, not reaching the target, the world is destroyed. Basil says, Eisenhower warned of the military-industrial complex. Kennedy got the memo in Dallas.
Yes.
Yeah. Eric says, ask Scott about dead hand.
I'm not quite sure what that is. I think it's a nuclear concept about, but I that's something we'd have to pass on to Scott, because I don't quite know what that is, to be honest.
Divermectin says, thank you. R.D. Patterson says, on a lighter note, Ritter as Walter Sobchak in The Big Lebowski Part 2.
I haven't seen
Metal
I haven't
Max
seen part
1970,
two.
thank you.
I haven't seen part 2. Part 1 is great, but I haven't seen part 2.
Metal Max 1970, thank you for that super sticker. Edgar, thank you for that super sticker. Chris, thank you for that super sticker. Kyle says, at Scott, set up a locals account. Thank you for that. Roar Ascadal, thank you for that super chat. Andy says, why won't Europe turn its back on the failed state of the USA?
Well, it's not a failed state. Or at least Europe is an even more failed state than the USA is, if I could put it like this. I think there are lots of reasons. I mean, clearly, a concept of the collective West has now taken hold amongst the political classes in both the US and in Europe. It's a disaster, in my opinion. It's leading us all to an appalling position. But I think what they say to themselves in Europe is we're not loyal to the US, we are loyal to the collective West. And, you know, a new rules-based international order and all those kind of things. So that's what they say to themselves. That's the ideology at the moment. And it's very, very difficult to break free of an ideology if you've internalized it, as these people have done.
Singularity says, Scott, conversations can be heroic tools. Keep sharing your wisdom.
Yeah.
Aisanamba says, sincere thank you to all three of you. Excellence in action.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Oyvind says, thank you for that super chat. Huck Finn, thank you for that super sticker. Martin, thank you for that super sticker. Huck Finn says, Scott, the only way it makes sense for the upcoming Russian offensive in Kharkov, do you see it that way as well? Scott answered that.
Yeah.
Mariana, Trump Ritter, 2024. Commando Crossfire says, can Russia really hope to seize all or most of Ukraine with the force they have standing now? Or how much would Russia need to mobilize to do this, and could they?
I think the answer to that is that most people who've looked at this think that the Russians have enough force to defeat the Ukrainian army, but if they're going to occupy the whole of Ukraine, they will need to send more people there. But that's a problem for the future. They have to defeat the Ukrainian army first.
Dennis Semenov, thank you for that super chat. Tabernak says, is there a regime change against Modi in the works?
I haven't seen it, and he looks pretty secure in India at the moment, and the economic numbers there have been strong.
Zariel says, Scott, is NATO shortly before it's dissolving? If not, how much longer?
Well, I can't answer for Scott, but I'll answer for myself. I think it is. How much longer? Well, I seem to remember, Zariel, that you were talking at about 5 years. I put it a bit longer than that. I'd say 10 years at the most. In our life, it's certainly not
Jules says, Scott, Jules says, Scott, in your opinion, is Poland going into Western Ukraine?
You know, I think we've discussed this at length. I don't think any of us knows it definitely, but it's possible, highly possible. But at the moment, I'm becoming slightly more unsure.
Commander Crossfire says, if Russia needs to take Kharkiv to protect Lugansk, wouldn't they need to protect Kharkiv, and so on and so on? Isn't it the whole of Ukraine or nothing?
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point, and I think that is precisely the logic that might start to take hold.
Paul Wolf, thank you for that super chat. Huck Finn says, maybe my question was misunderstood. Do you think that the Russian upcoming offensive will start with Kharkov as a most likely place to start the offensive?
I think he did answer this, actually. I remember this. Yeah, I think he did answer this, yes.
Yeah. Commander Crossfire says, isn't the only solution Ukraine not becoming a threat again by either installing a puppet government or annexing it all? Otherwise, the U.S. could just build back better.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a major problem. And as I said, I don't like this idea of puppet governments by definition. And I have to say, I think creating puppet governments is going to simply perpetuate the instability. So I can very easily see a situation where the Russians feel that some kind of, well, they would say reunification with that part of Ukraine which will reunify with them is really the only way.
Franny says, seems like the U.S. NATO is going to oust Zelensky. What do you think?
I think there's a high chance of that. I've been looking at the events of the purge in Kiev, and I do think that's the direction. I don't think we're quite at that point yet, but if I was Zelensky, I would be reading an awful lot about what happened to President Siem in South Vietnam and how he was overthrown in 1963 in a coup after he'd been built up by the United States in the years before into a kind of George Washington figure. So, be aware that the Americans can turn on you, at least the Americans who run things in the State Department and in the intelligence agencies.
Bohemian Gnostic says, one need not destroy one's enemy to be victorious. One need only destroy its willingness to engage. Sun Tzu,
Yes.
The Art of War.
Yes, I mean, lots of people quote that, but yes, I think that's true. Clausewitz put it better, actually, I think. Destroy the enemy's military. We discussed this still you can find the live stream where we talked about this. Destroy the enemy's army, the enemy's ability to sustain the war, and you've won. To occupy their territory, but the enemy's will to resist is still there, then you haven't won the war. And that's what the US discovered in Afghanistan, for example.
LJB says, thanks to everyone. Raphael says, is there a reason why we are not paying attention to what the vice president of the Duma said in French TV? Any negotiations will take place at the Polish border, he said. They will control Kiev.
Yeah. We should take into account those things. I mean, I think you're talking about Leonid Slutsky, and it must be pointed out that, yes, he is a vice chair of the Duma, but he's not a member of the decision-making party groups in Russia. He's not even a member of the ruling party. He's a member of Russia's liberal party, so-called liberal parties, the Liberal Democrat Party, Zhirinovsky's party. Zhirinovsky's died. He's taken over as the leader of that party. So I don't think he's close to the center of power, but I'm sure he reflects Russian thinking.
T-Tom says, schedule another session for the questions only with Scott.
Well, we're doing them now.
We're doing them now. David S. says, will the U.S. mobilize to meet Russian weaponry?
No, I don't think so. I think this is expecting too much of the U.S.
Rifi says, Israel sided with the U.S. in attacking Iran buildings. If Iran responds to Israel by attacking their ports, then Iran can destroy Israel's economy.
I think you're talking about a cycle of escalation, which would be very dangerous indeed. I don't think we will get there. I think both the Americans and the Russians will act to hold this back from going to those extremes.
Back to Da Vinci says, Scott, is the NATO West and U.S. exaggerating its lack of weapons to reinvigorate and refocus all budget investments into the military-industrial complex to make NATO ready for a future conflict with Russia? It is using this conflict to learn.
I think we discussed this already. I mean, they're not exaggerating. There are real problems here. Well, whether they might end up doing what you said is true. Yeah, they might do, but they're not exaggerating. The problems are real.
J. Galt, 1776, says Scott Ritter is Smedley Butler reincarnated. T-Tom says, I'm expecting both Alexes to have Scott's book behind them. I know Scott will not ask, but I do.
Well, I have it on Kindle, which is how I read things nowadays, principally. And can I say it's a great book?
T-Tom says, T-Tom says, you need Brits, French, and Israelis as well for that protest.
Yes, you do. But it may come.
And Huck Finn says, you are right, Scott. The shape of the battlefield would decide where and when. At the same time, Stavka has maps and plans. For sure. Question is, do you think that inexpensive offensive in Kharkov is to take that shape?
I think that we have to be very careful when we try and second guess Russian military planning, because the one thing that's been consistent about this war is that the Russians never do what people expect. They are always able to keep one step ahead of what we think that they're going to do. So I don't think they're going to go for Kharkov city itself. They may take action in Kharkov region. I think we should just wait and see.
ISO 982 says, Scott, humanity owes you its survival.
Yes.
And Kate LV sends a super sticker. And that is everything.
Wow.
Thank you to everybody for a lot of questions. I'll send the questions over to Scott as well, so he can have them, and he may want to reference them as well in various shows that he does. And thank you once again.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.